here's my class. It's called It's a New World After All, the process of creating a Central American persona. And here's me. So my name is Ilhuicacihuatl de Xochimilco, but you can call me Doña Yzma. There's my pronouns and my contact information in case you want to get in touch with me. And I'll be teaching today kind of just what I call a taster class. This is a class that is not intended to get you a really deep understanding of any particular aspect of Mesoamerica. It's just to give you a base level of knowledge for getting started in your research, getting started learning about Mesoamerica. If you, like many in the Americas, many in America and in Europe too, failed to get a lot of instruction on Mesoamerican history while you were in school, outside of maybe Aztec people sacrificed, commit or did human sacrifice. So if that's the only thing you know, we're going to try and clear that up. We're going to try and give you a little more of a fuller picture of the amazing cultures that were alive and existing in Mesoamerica by the time that the Spanish arrived, and are fantastic sources for persona work if you are interested in trying something new with your persona. I am the Facebook administrator for a group called the SCA New World Personas. We're an unofficial support group and research group for people who do this type of research in the society. We welcome anyone who is interested in furthering that goal. You don't necessarily have to play a New World or Mesoamerican, North American, South American persona to join. If you just want to support us and be with us and see what's going on in this corner of the SCA, that's where you can go. I was also the autocrat for the very first ever virtual American Studies Symposium. It was called Huapua Virtual New World Symposium. Took place last month, hosted by my fantastic barony in Atlantia Marinus. And I will also be autocrating the Known World Symposium of the Americas, which will be a 2-day event, including Bardic and ANS and all kinds of great things. If the Americas are something that you're interested in after you have explored a little bit in this class. I'm also a member of the Order of the Coral Branch for my research in New World Studies. The Order of the Coral Branch is Atlantia's AOA level ANS award. Please change. There we go. So the first question that I always get when I tell people what I do in the SCA is this something you can actually do? Yes, absolutely, 100%. So the idea of Mesoamerican New World personas has been supported by corpora, the governing documents of the SCA, for many, many years. And in fact, the SCA just over the last year has done a lot to increase that support in their wording for their introduction. There's also extensive documentation for interaction between American and European cultures in period. And there's a huge community of New World reenactors that already exist in the society, which I mentioned before, both on Facebook and in other spaces that can help you achieve those goals if this is something that you're interested in doing. Where do you start? So this class is where you start. This class is going to be a little bit bare bones for some of you, but I think it will give you kind of a taste of the many different types of research that you can do within Mesoamerican studies that fall under the SCA. Unfortunately, a lot of the sources on life in Central America were destroyed during the European colonization, during the conquest of Mexico and the surrounding areas, but there is still a lot that survives, and there's tons of material that is discovered every day, especially as the Museo Arqueológica in Mexico City continues to fund more digs and more advanced study of the area around Mexico City. So what this class will cover is we'll talk a little bit about the language barriers that you can face if you are primarily or solely an English speaker. We'll talk a little bit about the codices, which are the primary source documents for the colonial period for Mexica Aztec studies. We'll talk about online resources that you can use if you are trying to get a taste for it without spending a lot of money. And then I will give you what I've kind of called my menu for quite a while, just 10 aspects of Central American cultural history that a person might use as a springboard for new persona or new research projects. So you'll notice a couple of things that this class is not. So the first thing this class is not is a class on cultural appropriation. If this is an issue that you are concerned with, there are so many sources in the SCA now, including an entire office, the DEI office, that can assist you in finding information about those problems. This class is not intended to give you permission to just go wild and do whatever you want. This class is simply designed to inform you of some base level topics that might be of interest to you. And when you start digging, you'll start finding information and sources on what is acceptable as a person of a different ethnic heritage and what is not acceptable. It's not going to teach you how to ask those questions. It's just asking you to be cognizant of those. It's also, you'll see, not going to be an in-depth study of any particular aspect of that culture. I teach many other classes about Mexica or Aztec culture and Central American culture. I know a lot of people who teach on other aspects of Mexican culture and can help you find those sources if you're looking for them. This class is intended to just get you started. And so I hope that that is clear and exciting and something that you're looking forward to. I do see there is one question in the chat from Marl. Did Mesoamerica have potatoes, or is that a South American thing? Central America does have potatoes, and even if they didn't, there is an extensive trade network that goes from South America into Central America and up into what is today the southern United States. So trade in terms of food products is actually quite common. I don't have any specific recipes to share with you off the top of my head for potatoes, but I have seen a number of sources that show potatoes in use in Central America and in the southern United States. So the language barrier. I think this is something that a lot of people coming into Mesoamerican studies through the SCA are, I wouldn't say shocked, but it is something that takes some getting used to. When you're researching Central America, you're going to encounter an issue, and that issue is that the majority of higher level research being done on Central American cultures is being done in Spanish. It's not being done in English, it's not being done in German, and overwhelmingly, a lot of it is not being translated into English with any regularity. Additionally, some of the documents are written in indigenous languages, such as Nahuatl or Mayan dialects. Those are spoken still all over Central America, from Mexico to Guatemala. And there are also a large number of so-called Creole languages, which are blended indigenous and Spanish, or blended indigenous and English language. All of these can kind of create some problems when you're getting started, but that's not necessarily the end of it. You don't have to stop pursuing your interest. You can be like me and just trudge through using Google Translate and a Spanish to English dictionary, or you can also be like me and try to learn Spanish and classical Nahuatl, or you can find still quite a few good sources that have been translated into English and are available for you today. So one of those big sources that you're going to want to look at almost immediately as soon as you start digging into Central America is the Mexica codices. I'm going to use Aztec and Mexica kind of interchangeably, even though they're not necessarily the best words to be using interchangeably. And the reason I'm doing this is just for the accessibility for people who are not familiar with the distinctions between those words. But we are going to just start kind of looking at the codices. So these are, in my opinion, the 4 codices that you should really start with if you've never looked at period Central American literature, period Central American writing, or period Central American art. The Borgia group in particular is going to be very interesting because it is a pre-Hispanic text. So the text of much of the Borgia group was written before the arrival of Hernan Cortez, and it is primarily a ritual or divination text. So if you're interested in things like religion or astrology, this is going to be a text that is particularly interesting to you. The image on the side here is from the Borgia group, and it kind of shows the style of art and the style of iconography that you can expect from this type of codex. You may even recognize some of the art motifs in this from the Mexican flag. So that's a fun piece. And this entire group of codices is actually available free through the Vatican Digital Library. Pretty high resolution scans. The next one I would recommend, just to get a taste of how Central Americans are expressing themselves in period, how they think, how their worldview is shaped, I recommend the Cantares Mexicanos. The Cantares Mexicanos being a collection of poetry and musical kind of motifs or poetic motifs that would have been used with music. There are 2 translations that are worth looking up. Both have their pluses and minuses, both have their criticisms. John Bierhorst is an earlier translation, I believe from the 1980s. His translation is colored by his belief that the Aztec people, the Mexica people living at Tenochtitlan were connected literarily and ethnically with the Plains Indians of North America. So his work is colored in that way, and that has been a common criticism of him, but they are still very excellent translations to look at. David Bowles is a relatively new translator, just in the last, I want to say 10 years or so, who has been putting out work. He works out of University of Texas, I believe, and his translations are really treasured by a lot of people for being quite eloquent, being very musical. His translations focus on trying to evoke the sense of what that music or that poetry would have been like read in period, but just in English. So both of these translations are readily available, though you will have to pay for them. But David Bowles makes a lot of his research available online for free through Medium or through Twitter. So he's a great person to look up. Another source that is interesting from a material culture point of view is the Codex Mendoza. The Codex Mendoza is a list of leaders of Tenochtitlan in kind of in order, and it also gives pretty extensive descriptions of the tribute that was paid to them, which is a really interesting thing to look at if you are trying to determine what types of day-to-day items your persona may have had in their home, or what those items may have looked like, especially if your persona is going to be structured out of the nobility or structured to be part of like the noble or upper mercantile class. This codex is free to view digitally through the government of Mexico. I will say I have a handout with all of the links for all of these that I will get together and I will post in the event for this class. So if you're looking at it and you're like, free to view digitally from the government of Mexico, how is the government of Mexico getting me this? I will put the link up for all of these so that you don't have to obsessively try to track them down through Google. The fourth one is the codex that I think most people are familiar with if they've even done a quick Google about Central America, and that is the Florentine Codex. The Florentine Codex is an absolutely exquisite document, absolutely recommended. It is not a own voices document, which a lot of people would say is a criticism, but it is written by a man who a lot of people consider to be one of the first anthropologists, a man named Fray Sagahun, who was a Spanish friar who went and lived among the Aztec people, the Mexica people at Tenochtitlan, and he wrote an extensive document. It's over 2,400 pages. It has thousands of illustrations, and it is divided into a variety of subjects from religion to clothing to food. So if you're looking for a really comprehensive glance at what it would have been like living in central Mexico at this time, I absolutely think that this is the source you want to look at. There are beautiful published versions of this book with full color illustrations, but it is also viewable online, not in translation, through the World Digital Library. Just to give you a taste of what you can expect from the codices, this is the Codex Mendoza. When it was on display at the Bodleian Library, you can see from here, just from these 2 pages, how in depth you can get with material culture with regard to central Mexico. So right here, if you're a fighter, for example, this is all of these pieces are a kit. This is this armor and shields, headdresses, and then further down you'll see some jewelry. It's quite extensive what you can find in terms of just images. So you don't necessarily have to just rely on like educated guesses. I have a lot of people who suspect that we don't actually know a lot about central Mexico. They tell me, all those resources were destroyed. That's true, a lot of them were, but we still have some fantastic resources, as you can see from this slide, that give you a really great idea of where you can build your kit, build your persona, and make it look as authentic as somebody who does, Viking or 14th century French persona. So this is some other resources in English that I think are really great starting points. The British Museum has an online tour of their Mexico exhibits, as well as some really great up-close images of Aztec, Mayan, Olmec, Mixtec, Texcoco art. And I put the link here, but I would also look on their YouTube channel. The British Museum has a very extensive YouTube channel where curators actually go in depth on individual artifacts and do some extremely close-up images, so you can really see the texture on a piece of clothing or the mixture of colors on a statue, which is truly fantastic. I also recommend, if you don't have a lot of background in the history of Mexico or the history of the Americas, Khan Academy has a series of Mesoamerican lectures that start in North America and then pursue Central and South American history as well. The reason I include this in here is because I think knowing kind of the big picture history of some of these places can help you narrow down where you want to spend your research time. We were talking before the class about kind of the quagmire of like research holes you can fall into if you just like, I want to study the Americas and period. Well, the Americas are gigantic, and there's so many different cultural groups in the Americas that it would be quite difficult for you to just say, well, I study the Americas. Okay, good luck. You're probably going to struggle a little bit. The Khan Academy Mesoamerican lectures give you that big picture so that you can then zero in on the things that you're actually interested in long term. There is a website called the FAMSI, Foundation for the Advancement of Mesoamerican Studies. This is famsi.org, and what I like about them is it has a variety of primary sources for you to go through, including maps, codices, images of manuscripts, translations of poetry, and lots of free to download academic papers without necessarily having to go through academia.org or academia.edu and having to hopefully search the right combination of keywords to get the free stuff. This is a place where you can get a lot of things specifically to Central America, Mesoamerica. MesoWeb is another really good one, mesoweb.com. The best thing about this website, I will tell you right now, are the 3D reconstructions of buildings and archaeological sites in Mesoamerica. So if you're kind of been like, I don't really understand the spacing of Tenochtitlan, I don't really understand how Itinampa works, these 3D reconstructions can kind of give you your bearings, try to understand the space better. They have lots of videos of archaeological sites, kind of video tours through these different sites, and some pretty extensive rubbings of the stone art at these sites. I would also recommend checking out the University of Texas. They have an entire division of their history archaeology department called the Mesoamerican Center. And every year they have an event called the Mesoamerican Meetings. Last year for 2020, it was a completely free event with about 2 days of lectures on a variety of subjects directly related to Mesoamerica. So you could get quite deep in there if you wanted to. They were available both in English and Spanish. So that's a great source for you. And if you want to travel a lot, I believe they also do some like in-person classes in Guatemala. So if you just have, spare money hanging around to traipse down to Guatemala for a class, that's another option. The next 10 slides are just going to be ideas for you guys. I'm going to give you a little bit of why I really like this subject so much. And then if it's something that you're interested in, you can get in touch with me. I'm happy to point you towards more resources. Or in the best case scenario, I know somebody who teaches a class about that subject that I can hook you up with. So one of the best things about Mesoamerica for me is food and drink. I do food and drink in the SCA. I love cooking in the SCA. I love doing food classes and little kind of Aztec meals. And what food and drink is going to open up to you is a whole bunch of food that you can't eat if you're just going to Europe. So if you want to eat avocado toast, you need to do Mesoamerican studies. It's great. We have chocolate, avocados, tomatoes, a variety of different fish that are not available in Europe, turkey. So there's lots of great options in the Americas. In fact, we have so much information about what they were eating thanks to Sahagún that we can really reconstruct an Aztec feast kind of without a problem. So if you like traditional Mexican food today, so like tamales, tortilla, pozole, all of those foods are period and are completely available to you if this is the type of food that you like to eat. The next kind of taster is sexuality and gender. This is a really fun one for me because it connects with the attempts by the SCA to be more inclusive, not just in terms of race and ethnicity, but also in terms of sexuality and gender expression. So the sex and gender expression norms for the Americas are substantially different in a lot of ways than what it looks like in Western Europe. I'm not saying necessarily that every culture in the Americas was fully accepting, fully modern, and fully progressive, but some of these expressions of gender and sex are a little more empowering for people who don't feel necessarily accepted by the medieval standards that might be placed on them in a kind of medieval Europe setting. So you're going to get a lot of situations where there are genders that are not male or female, the kind of two-spirit idea kind of reflected down in Central America. You'll also get a lot of different gods or expressions of gods that are either genderless or multi-gendered. You'll also get quite a few interesting stories of erotica from Central America and South America that express that both that have both heterosexual, homosexual relationships expressed in a completely neutral setting, meaning they are not expressed as negative. They're expressed as just another way that we have relationships. So that is a place that you can go if that's the kind of support that you're looking for. The goddess that is represented here is Tlazatleotl. She's a goddess of filth and dirt and excrement, but she's also the goddess of female expressions of sexuality and women who are like empowered by their own sexuality. She's a fascinating figure if you are interested in her. I actually do an entire class on gender in the Aztec Empire because I find the subject so engaging and so fun and really just an empowering space to look for new ways of thinking about womanhood, but also new ways of looking at your sexuality or gender expression. And that all kind of ties into number 3. Number 3 is religion and mythology. So for the young people, sometimes telling people that the Aztecs did the human sacrifice, it is a real winner for them. They're very interested in this gruesome historical bit. But the actual practice of human sacrifice, the practice of the flower wars, where they acquired human sacrifice through ritualized warfare, these are all much larger cultural ideas that feed into or are fed into by a really wide mythology that we just don't know enough about or we aren't taught enough about in our regular school space. If you really love that big, bright, epic sense of mythology that you will get from like the Greek and Roman myths or from Viking myths, you really cannot go wrong with picking up some books on Aztec mythology. I really recommend that, as there are quite a few period sources for Aztec religion, specifically in the Florentine Codex, but there are also post-period collections that reflect back on Mesoamerican religion, such as the Popol Vuh, which is a Mayan kind of legend of the dead, legend of a trip down into effectively hell. So there's a lot of these kind of big myths, big legends that I think are really worth looking into if that's the kind of story that you like to read. Cartography and map art. This is a fun one, especially if you are a scribe or someone who likes to do a lot of different art projects. One of the really fun things about post-colonial or post-conquest culture is that the indigenous people of Tenochtitlan and the area surrounding, they are kind of brought into the system, brought into the production of maps and art of the period. So these post-conquest maps are actually drawn overwhelmingly by indigenous people or the descendants of indigenous people now mixed with European, so mestizo people. And you'll see very quickly how intricate, how colorful, how unique some of the expressions of distance and time are on a map. This particular map was done in 1580. A lot of these don't have artists attached to them because they are indigenous people usually working in a kind of church environment or a religious, like not, I don't want to say convent, but like in a mission type environment. So we don't necessarily know a lot about who created them, but you can see how intricate the trade routes, how intricate the connections between all of these different places actually were. And it gives you a really nice period example of what we were talking about a little bit before the class started, that we aren't just looking at individualized cultures isolated from everyone else, that we are looking at an interconnected community of empires and cultures and communities all the way from Canada to Argentina, very connected and very aware of each other and what is going on in different spaces, despite the fact that they basically have to walk there. Another topic that I think I honestly recommend, because the kind of kits that you guys could do would be so cool, is to look into warfare, fighting, archery, and thrown weapons. Of course, with regards to archery, you'll also want to look at the kind of dart throwing atlatl that was popular in Central America, but you will also want to look at the history of the eagle and jaguar warriors of Central America. Their training systems were extremely brutal and sometimes very ritualized and kind of tied into their religious expression, but they also got to wear these amazing outfits. Sometimes we laugh about them as being onesies in like the New World community because they kind of just look like super comfy onesies, but these were for battle. These were truly for going to war. There's wonderful documentation of these shields with these wonderful illustrations on them. There are some people in the New World community who are actually capturing images of all of these shields in order to convert them into heraldry. So that's wonderful. In the chat, we just had a comment: if you can have pajama Vikings, you can have onesie Mesoamericans, and I love that. I definitely recommend. Unfortunately, Meryl, I don't know that I can answer your question. Your question was, what are the war onesies made from? I can't answer that because I don't know off the top of my head. But what I will do is I will ask one of my friends who is a wonderful expert on Mesoamerican warfare and Mesoamerican weaponry. And I am sure that I can find you an answer and get it for you. And I'll try to post it in the event, the discussion for the event, to see if we can get that answer for you. This is a fun one: hair and makeup. What I love about the hair and makeup of Mesoamerica is that if you've ever wanted like fun colored hair, or just like blood red teeth, this is the place to go. You can absolutely make yourself into a living nightmare, and it is period and wonderful and fantastic. So in this image, you'll see a variety of hairstyles that Mexica women in Tenochtitlan would have used. Most of them are kind of upturned braids, but they used so many different materials, natural materials in their environment to color their hair, their skin, their teeth. They have the Spanish listed them as dyeing their hair with purple, green, or gold, and that they would paint their teeth or lips bright red or even black. So if you want to look absolutely bananas at an event, this is a fun way to do it and have really fun dyed hair without necessarily being not period. Your Excellency, did you have a question?
Yes. Are they wearing culottes? I realize
Kind of.
Okay, so it is
Kind of, yeah.
like a short pants style. Okay.
So I have read two different versions of this, and I will tell you both just to make sure that both are expressed. I have seen people say that these are pants, which awesome. I've also seen people say this is a wrap skirt.
Okay.
I don't think either one is necessarily wrong because I don't know how many actual versions of this we have. In modern Mexican culture and modern Mexican spaces, you would not wear pants with this necessarily. You'd wear a wrap skirt underneath your huipil, but I've seen people use this as pants just for ease of getting around because the big, nice, flowy pants with that pattern are going to effectively look the same when you're at a distance as a wrap skirt might look, especially since they are, you can see from the illustration, it is quite loose. It's not like super tight on the skin or anything. So
excellent.
Yeah, super comfy garb. Super comfy garb is the way to go. This is kind of like one of the reasons why I love it is because it's so kind of loose and flowy, and you can make it from a lot of different materials and get the same look. So that if you live in some place where it's very hot, this is a way to go. In fact, I'm actually going to skip the next one so that we can go straight to the garb one, and I'll go back to the other one. But so garb is a real winner if you love Mesoamerica, because you can see from here, there's such a variety of color and design. This piece of art is by a man named Daniel Parada. His pieces do have a little bit of interpretation to them. They're not one-for-one images, obviously from the codices, but many of these patterns, these looks, these designs are attested to in the codices, and you can find examples of them in period illustrations. These are just more what they might look like on a more realistic human body. You can see just kind of a huge variety of what you might be able to do, especially for women. There's a lot of different colors and designs. Men, it can get a little bit more revealing as you go, but you can also see that there are options for long cloaks or ways to cover up if that is what you're interested in. You'll see number 15, that nice onesie with some very nice accentuation of the male form. So there you go. Some fun stuff. I love the women's clothing in Aztec period. It is my absolute favorite. In the comments, it says the white scarf, the Mesoamerican codpiece. Ah, yes, perfect. But you'll see all of the men basically are wearing them. They're just in different states of design and coverage. So you'll also see in this picture, you'll see some of the women who've painted their skin yellow. Probably not a great move to do modernly. I would tend to steer away from the literal painting of the skin. At least the full face. I don't know that anybody would be terribly upset if you did portions of the face in a specific design, but I would tend to not paint your whole face red or yellow. That might be a little unbecoming. But you'll see some of those designs. You'll also see on this, most of the women have that tied up braid look that is very common in Mesoamerica. You'll also see that in Mayan art as well. So it's just a very popular look all through Central America. The one that I skipped to get straight to the garb because, of course, poetry and literature. If you love poetry, if you love writing your own poetry, Mesoamerican poetry is very free form, very stylistic, very driven by nature symbolism and symbolism using nature to describe leadership or nature to describe people. It's absolutely beautiful, recommended. The two major poetry collections are the Cantares Mexicanos, which we talked about a little bit earlier, but there's also the Romances of the Lords of New Spain, which is another collection of Mesoamerican poetry. This one, a lot of the poems are actually attributed to a leader of Texcoco called, oh gosh, I know his name. His name is Nezahualcóyotl. And so those are slightly different. They have a slightly different rhythm than some of the ones that are in the Cantares Mexicanos. But both of them have that kind of free form, free design. It's suspected that a lot of these were read over top of music or performed along with music, percussive music. So that's a really fun idea. There are a lot of modern Mexican artists who try to kind of set these to music, kind of set them to what they might sound like, both in classical Nahuatl and in English or in Spanish. And I think they are just quite lovely. Ooh. The last one that I will give you as an idea for where you might want to go is to look into the Central American ideas of astronomy, space, and time. You're going to find a lot of ancient alien stuff here, but don't get distracted because there's actually good stuff in here too. The Aztec lived their life on a calendar. They were obsessed with calendars and time and the speeding forward or the slowing of the destruction of the earth based on personal and empire-wide behavior. So they had a lot of, sorry, that's my my boomer bedtime alarm letting me know that it's time to go to bed. But this one is a way to think about the moving forward of time. So they also have what are called named day names. So names that you would name your children based exclusively on when they are born and what the stars look like at any given time. This one, the very first time I ever taught this class was February 13th of last year. So you'll see kind of what that date would look like for an Aztec person. You'll see that they were in the year of Kali, or the house, that they were part of the 13-day period of the jaguar. Osula is a jaguar. And then they were on day 3 for the vulture. And this all kind of changes every day. The Museo Arqueológico in Mexico actually puts out what today's date is every single day, along with an image of what that day name symbol would have been. So that's a really fun place to start if you are wanting to start tracking what those days would look like and what the passage of time would feel like for a Central American person. And those are my 10 kind of taster items. I'm gonna end the slideshow now so I can see all of you guys, or see the ones that wish to be seen. But those are my 10 items that I think are great starting points if you are interested in Mesoamerican culture. They're not all encompassing. Obviously, I didn't go super in depth on any of them. I can try to answer some questions about them if you would like, or I can, of course, offer you to look up or find sources for you or work with you to find sources on those topics if you'd like. But I'm available now for questions if y'all have any.
I was kind of curious, some of these questions you may not be able to answer, is that what textiles were they using? And I noticed blue was being used in some of those outfits.
Right. So I am not a garb maker. This beautiful piece was made for me by a lovely lady in Guatemala. Mm-hmm. I did not make this. I'm not a garb maker. I don't know a lot about garb, but I do know a really fantastic member of the SCA named Oxalatul Montezuma, who actually teaches classes on Mexica garb and how that was done. I do know that they used combinations of amaranth and like cactus insects in order to create the nice millennial pink that you see on a lot of Aztec garb, which is quite nice. I have also seen a lot of things on natural dyeing with avocados that was done in period. I can't necessarily answer with any expertise on what things were made from or what they were crafted from. They do.
Dyeing sounds like a bit of a waste of delicious avocados.
Oh no, it's you use the skin and the pit.
Yeah.
Ooh.
This is actually why I have a couple of avocado pits sitting on my drain board.
Same.
Right. So we also had a dyeing class that focused on the dyeing with lichen of the Pacific Northwest. And our teacher for that has worked with the Coast Salish tribe up here in Canada. And she had mentioned that blue is particular. That's why His Excellency was like, "Ooh," because blue is particularly hard to produce with the lichen from around here. There's one that does it. Yeah, modern dyes, it's hard to do. So, but yes, the avocado pits are in addition to the 3 paper bags and 1 screw container of lichen that we collect. That's what the ice tour.
If I could tell you where the blue is from, I would. I don't know off the top of my head. The only practice that I have been looking at is trying to get that nice pink color for women's garb. Because it seems like every woman in Central America was wearing these beautiful pink coats and these beautiful pink like cloaks and things, and I want one. So if I have to learn how to dye just so that I can have one, you know what? We'll do it. Luckily, I have quite a few people in Atlantia who are kind of like big on natural dyeing and are just like, what? There's something else I can dye with that isn't these 4 things that I've been dyeing with for like 10 years.
Yeah.
Let me tell you. I'll bring you some avocados. We'll eat the avocados and then we'll dye with them. It'll be great.
Yeah, it's super exciting and a fun realm to enter into. And now, like I already have one persona.
Pink as a feminine color is more of a modern construct, and even a cultural construct, because it's very popular among Hispanic men. So
Absolutely. But definitely every woman in the codices is wearing pink, and I love it. I'm ready to go.
Looks like
Pink and stripes, lots of stripes. They love stripes. And you'll also see a lot of pictures of women in these like patchwork outfits, which I love, where they're like, hold on, hold on. I got it. Okay, let's get out of big view and let's see if I can find lovely ladies in patchwork outfits. Oh, here we go. Because y'all know. Sometimes you just collect everything. It's fine.
It's almost like you're a Scadian. I mean,
what? Unbelievable. All right. So ignore my World of Warcraft background and just look at this amazing outfit. Like, what is this? This is incredible. Like, I love all these colors, this big jangly necklace, these stripes, this wonderful flower pattern here. I love these shoes, which are like sandals with little ties on them. Like, I love it. This whole outfit just, and this like fun kind of like twisted braid look. So she gets these little horns coming out on the sides of her head.
Mm-hmm. So from
y'all know.
from a research perspective, is there, well, you're not as much of a textile person, so we should stop.
I'm not. I want to be, but I actually don't know how to do any of that. So if you just all want to come to my house for a weekend of teaching me how to make Mexican garb, I would love it.
Okay.
The distance is a little far. Distance might be a problem, but we'll figure it out.
I was do you know, are there many finds of pre-colonial non-stone based artifacts? I don't know how else to put that. Things, you know.
I understand. Yes and no. There are more that we're finding. If you're interested in West Mexico in particular, which not Aztec Empire, but also a very interesting culture group. A lot more of that is preserved just because the environment is a lot more forgiving. It's not as wet. So a lot of new stuff is coming out of that area, particularly if you're into like brewing and distilling and food. So that that
Nice.
section is growing a lot more. There have been some grave finds, obviously, but mostly it's just human remains and kind of fragments. There are a couple of shields that are preserved, which are super cool. There are non-stone finds. They're just, I think, less. They're they're less monumental, so you see them less frequently. But there are a number of kind of like fiber crafts, shields that have been saved, and these fantastic kind of statuary that are made out of not stone, but are made out of like gold or jade and things like that. So I guess stone, but like not rocks.
Yeah,
Basically,
yeah.
is
Well,
what you're asking. Is like, is there colorful stuff and not like stones?
Well, no, that because the stones are absolutely fascinating, and I know that a great deal of the written record comes from the stone things. But
Right.
yeah, there's always curiosity about what all is out there.
I would definitely say if you are interested in seeing how people of the period dressed, the Codex Mendoza and the Florentine Codex have extensive pictures of clothing, day-to-day clothing, but also ritual clothing, which is very nice. They have a lot of pictures of like the headdresses that people would wear and the makeup that people would wear. So if you're interested in kind of the costuming or the clothing angle on that, the codices are probably your best source for full color illustrations, full color pieces that you could reconstruct.
Excellent. You mentioned that gardening was. Have you ventured into the world of planting a garden based on your studies?
Yes and no. I have in theory. I have what I will hope will eventually be a chinampa. So that we can try to grow squash and beans and things like that in a more traditional fashion. My goal for the fall is to put in some amaranth because like I have a friend here in Atlantia who does a lot of natural dyeing, who wants to experiment with amaranth as a dye, not just a food source. Amaranth, of course, being kind of like one of the primary grains of the empire. It's both like protein full and also much easier to procure for a large number of people. As when you have just like turkeys and lizards and fish, sometimes the supply chain for protein can get a little not great. But amaranth is definitely one of those big kind of fillers for them, and they have a lot of like ritualized pieces around it, kind of the forming of amaranth into shapes and things like that. To create images of God that can then be consumed. So that's really fun. So amaranth is a big one that we're going to try to do. And then also I have some friends down in Texas who are growing agave plants that will hopefully be eventually turned into pulque, which is the brew of choice in Mesoamerica, which is fermented agave. It has kind of a fun peppery taste, and honestly, the longer you ferment it, the more delicious it becomes. So
are they doing the traditional chew it and spit it back into the vat pulque?
So that is chicha, which is
okay.
Shisha or chicha, which is a slightly different drink. Pulque is just fermented agave. So you can use agave syrup, or you can use like the kind of gel agave that comes from the plant. Both of which it just creates a nice peppery beer.
Right. Yeah. Awesome.
Distilling is a topic that a lot of people are very interested in because everybody wants to know, like, so agave, so is tequila period drink? Maybe. But we've seen some interesting research come out, especially of West Mexico, that shows that distilling may have been going on before the Spanish arrived. But nonetheless, we do know that basically as soon as the Spanish arrived, they were like, oh, you're fermenting it, we can distill it. So tequila, probably also period.
Oh, Europeans. Oh.
Yeah, they were helping.
How can we get more alcohol over here without having to call Spain for it? Perfect. Excellent.
Yeah. Oh, good times. Good time.
But yeah, pulque for sure. If you want a relatively low bar of entry fermented beverage, you just put agave syrup and water in a container, and then you just let it sit for like 6 months.
So you don't have
And
to add yeast?
you don't have to. You can get it wild. You can do wild yeast. But I mean, I know people who do add yeast. I know people who add champagne yeast to kind of spark it up. But if you have a nice yeasty house, you can get yeast. The flavor is going to vary dramatically, but you can brew without yeast.
Yeah, we have a brewery, over in Monmouth, where they actually have a beer named, they have a very successful beer that was cultivated or cultured using a culture from one of the brewer's beards.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
That's intense.
Yeah, it's quite successful.
That's a lot. I mean, I do ferments here, just like bread, like sourdoughs and ferments here. So I'm quite familiar with the use of wild yeast for fermenting and things like that. I know not everybody's super comfortable with it, but my Baroness and Baroness Delecta, she did a pulque using, I believe, champagne yeast, and it was delicious. So that's a fun experiment.
Yeah, we could do ginger beer and pulque.
It's really a different flavor. I recommend it if you're looking for something different.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite what you expect, I think, from a home brew at an SCA event. There's a certain flavor that you get from SCA homebrews. There's a flavor you get. Pulque is not that flavor, but it is a very easy homebrew. It kind of reminds me, if you guys have ever done like oh gosh, what's it called? Like a Korean rice wine, kind of ferment. It can be fermented for a very short amount of time and still be drinkable, or you can ferment it for a long time and have a much more intense alcohol flavor, much more intense like sourness. So there's some ideas.
Yeah. His Excellency also is a food-based Canadian, so
I am.
we're always looking for fun ways to have good food.
Yeah, so my goal for 2021, since I didn't get to do them in 2020, is to have small kind of intimate Aztec dinners at my house where everybody can kind of try a bunch of different things, period tamales, period pozole, period kind of corn preparations, and kind of learn about them in like a smaller environment where everyone can try something. It's especially a nice one because a lot of the products are gluten-free. So if you have people with gluten sensitivities, that's really nice. A lot of Aztec food is vegetarian because, again, the primary foodstuffs are beans, squash, corn, maize, and different forms of amaranth. So you have a lot of vegetarian and even vegan options. So there's a lot of fun stuff there. If you like spicy food and you like
dairy free.
Yes, dairy.
Yes, and dairy free. Everything can basically be made with a lot of sensitivities in mind.
Okay, right now I'm going to, let's call the class officially over. Do you want closing words? And then I will stop the record, and then all those people that may not
want to be recorded.
Yeah, they can.
Absolutely. So I guess my closing words for the class would just be that I hope that this gave you some ideas for where you might want to go with Mesoamerican research. Obviously, none of it was said with a huge degree of depth or like extreme expertise, but so many people have asked, is this something I can even do? Where do I get started? Where do I find resources? And this is just the tip of that Mesoamerican iceberg. The same way that you would get started with any other persona, these are kind of the very tippy tops where you can start developing the kind of persona that matters to you, that makes you feel good about yourself and makes you feel good about your research. A bunch of different ideas for topics that you could kind of dig into. Again, this is a kind of new field of study for the SCA, but there are resources. It's not a new field of study for like the world. So there are resources out there to help you. And the New World Personas group on Facebook is an extremely welcoming, extremely accessible place for people. if you are interested in pursuing this further. I would also say to please just get in touch with me either by email or Facebook if you don't necessarily want to join the group, or if you have specific questions and need some guidance on where to find that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely.